Hello and welcome to another tutorial by Harla Penguin. My name is Norm and I will be your host today. In today's tutorial, I will show you how to use music to drive animation in Blender. In this example, we are moving the bowl up and down with the music, which causes the balls to bounce around. Blender provides a really easy way to animate sound. To show the basic concept, I will start off by deleting the default cube and adding an empty. And this will not only help me to demonstrate the technique, but we will also use the empty to animate our scene. I am using Blender 2.82a, so I'm going to go to the Animation tab, and on the right I'm going to select the object, and I'm going to right-click on the Z location and add Insert Single Keyframe. In the bottom view, I'm going to change this to Graph, and I'm going to click on the Z location. I'll select Key, Bake Sound F Curve, and I'm going to select my music, which in this case I'm using a song called Stranger Danger, which is from the YouTube audio library. On the right hand side you will see some settings. We have some frequency settings, attack time, release time, threshold, and some checkboxes. The frequencies will allow you to filter or use certain frequencies to drive the animation. And you can see here it's set from 0 to, I think it's 100,000. Now for my animation, I want the bass to primarily drive the animation. So I'm going to keep this one at 0. And I want to set the highest frequency to 2000. And I will bake the sound to F curve. And now you can see we have the sound. All right. So we can go ahead and play the animation, and you can see that the empty starts to bounce. Now you won't hear the music. You will need to add that either in your final composite or in an external program, but you can see that it's bouncing with the music. All right, so next step we're going to model the bowl. I'm going to add a sphere. I'm going to scale it up. We'll change to the wireframe. I'm going to select half of these and delete them. Now I'm going to flatten this. I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to add the solidify and increase the thickness a little bit. That looks good. Make this smooth shading. I'm going to apply the modifier, and the reason for doing that is I want to make sure that with the physics that it's actually using this modifier to calculate the geometry from this modifier. And I'll go ahead and go to shading. We will add a new material. And for this, I'm going to start off with a wave texture. I'm going to create a sort of a procedural wood texture. I'm going to set the scale to 6.8 and the distortion to 17.4 Detail is fine at 2 and 1. Now in this, I'm going to have a mix RGB node, and I'm going to use the factor as an input, and I'm going to just choose 2 different types of brown, one being a little bit of a darker brown, and the other being sort of a lighter brown. And I'm going to plug that into a hue saturation. Put the color in and plug that into base color. And with this, I'm just going to modify the saturation a little bit. Just saturate it maybe to 0.8. All right, now I want to use a little bit of this on the specular as well. So I'm going to add a math node. And I'm going to multiply this value times 0.1 just to make it not as strong. Then add another math node where I will add, and for this one I will add 0.01 and put that into the specular. And I'm going to decrease the roughness just a little bit. And otherwise that looks pretty good. So let's just rotate here. Let's see. It's looking pretty good. All right, now how to animate the bowl based on the empty. We'll go to Object, and I'm going to right-click on the Z location and add a driver. And I want the variable I'm going to set to the empty Z location. And I'm going to multiply, in this expression, I'm going to multiply times 0.5, and that just makes it a little bit less strong. Now let's go to animation. Let's check it. And what you can see is that it's bouncing with the empty, but not as much as the empty is bouncing. All right, so next, let's add in the balls. So I'm going to add a UV sphere, scale it way down, lift it up here. We will shade smooth, and I'm going to add a shader onto this, so go to rendering, shading. And before we forget, let's call this wood, and select this, new, call this one ball. And what I want is I want to create one shader, but with multiple different colors. So to do this, I'm going to delete the principled shader. I will add in a node called Object Info. And the reason for this is it has a random which just assigns a different random number between 0 and 1 to every object. And I'm going to use that with a color ramp. And I'm going to add a few more spots onto this for a total of 4. We'll make one just a green, sort of brighter green. Make one red. Make one blue. And we'll make one yellow. And I'll plug the random into the vector. Now we could leave it like this, where there's sort of a spectrum of different colors, but instead of using linear, I am going to use constant, which just means anything between 0 and about, I can actually set this to 0.25 is going to be blue. From 0.25 to 5, 0.5 is going to be red, and then from 0.5 to 0.75, oh, sorry, from 0.5 to 0.75 will be green, 0.75 to 1 will be yellow. Now with this, I'm also going to use a noise texture. And I'm just going to use the default. And I'll use a brightness and contrast. And I'm going to plug from the color into the color on the brightness and contrast. I'll set the brightness to 1. And then I want a mix node. Mix RGB. And I'm going to take our original color and put that in the top, and our brighter color and put that in the second one, and then mix it with a factor of the noise. And then I will plug that into a diffuse. And just to take a look at what that looks like, I can plug that into the surface. And you can see that we have red with a little bit of white, sort of very, very bright red, just to make it a little bit interesting. Now I also want to add a glossy shader to this. So I'll add actually a glass. And I'm going to make the roughness 0.1. And then I will add a mix shader with a glass on top, the diffuse here, and then plug that in. And I want to change that just a little bit and just make it more weighted toward the color. So make that 0.8. And that just gives a sort of a glassy look to it. All right, so now with that in place, I just need to add a little bit of physics to this. So for the bowl, I'm going to add rigid body, and I'm going to make it passive but animated. And for the ball, I'm going to make this a rigid body active. And with all of that, let's go ahead and see what this looks like. And not quite what we expected. Let's try. There we go. So a couple of things going on here. One is if you look at it, it looks like it's just bouncing off of an imaginary surface on the bowl. So one thing that we need to change on the bowl is for the shape, instead of a convex hull, we want that to be a mesh. And so that it actually calculates on the inside. So let's set that back. And very important to make sure that when you run the animation, make sure that you're starting from 1. So there we go. And it drops in. All right, that looks good. It looks maybe a little bit powerful. So let's actually try bringing this down closer. All right, so you may need to play with your driver just a little bit until you get exactly the right amount of bounce. So let's edit our driver. Instead of 0.5, let's change that to 0.25. We'll start it over. That's looking better. All right. So now all we have to do is duplicate these balls a little bit, just to make them bounce into each other. And let's again take a look at our animation, and that looks great. So the final step in the process is let's add some lighting. I'll get rid of this default light, and I'm going to go to shading, and I'm going to flip over to world. And what I want to do is I want to add an environment texture. And for this one, I am going to use Factory Yard 4K, which is an image that I got from HDRI Haven. It's a fantastic place to get HDRI images. And I will take that and I will plug that into the background. And what I want is, so you could go just with this, but what happens is it does a great job of lighting the scene, but at the same time it's lighting the scene, you also see it. And I like to use it for lighting, but not necessarily to see. So I like to go through and add an input node on light path. And this just has a number of different light paths asking, is the light path that's being calculated one of these? And I will take that and I will also I will duplicate this background and add a mix RGB. With a black and a white. Put that in here. And I'll plug that into a mix shader. And I want to check if it's a camera ray. And if it's a camera ray, then it will show this bottom one. Actually, instead of a mix, I'm just going to do this. I'll put an RGB color. So if it is a camera ray, then it will show the background. If it's anything else, it will show the lighting based on this. So right now in the animation, I have this only set to go 250 frames. If you decide you want a longer animation, if you want it to go for the entire length of the song, then change it here. But you also must make sure that you are changing the physics settings. So under the scene properties, go to rigid body world, and make sure that you're setting your simulation start to 1, end to 250. You can also change the speed of this if you feel like the animation is moving too fast or too slow. For instance, if you wanted to move at half speed, you could set it to 0.5, and then it looks like it's going much slower. And that's all it takes to create an animation. Thanks for watching. I'd love your comments below or any suggestions for any other tutorials you'd like to see. Thank you.